The roar of the crowd was like a wave crashing over his skin, alive, vicious, and eager to consume. Cain felt it reverberate in his bones as he stood alone in the cold, rust-streaked chamber beneath the great arena of Zarkal. These were not human cheers. The voices belonged to the Vorix, a race that had perfected cruelty into performance. They didn't just watch combat. They sanctified it. He had learned their ways in blood. Cain had been captured in a border ambush nearly 3 months ago, though time had lost most of its meaning. A Terran soldier, now a gladiator for the amusement of aliens who viewed his kind as little more than expendable meat. He wasn't supposed to make it past the first match. But Cain wasn't like the others. Not entirely. He studied his enemies like a tactician, fought like a brawler, and endured like someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. The other prisoners had either died or vanished beneath the shifting, grim bureaucracy of the arena. But Cain endured, because he could not bear the idea of dying for a species that cheered when blood hit the sand. The gate creaked open. Cain blinked against the blinding alien sunlight. Arena Marshal Gruth, a massive Vorix with tusks like jagged obsidian, stood at the threshold. His voice, a grinding bass of gravel and hate, bellowed without needing amplification. "It is time, Terran. The champion awaits. Try not to die too quickly, she prefers a challenge." Cain stepped forward, the stone floor gritty beneath his bare feet. His face held the faintest of smirks. "I'll do my best not to bore her." The Colosseum unfolded before him like a wound carved into the planet itself. A vast pit of black stone tiered with millions of sneering, violet-hued aliens packed shoulder to shoulder, draped in blood-red cloaks, their mandibles chittering in excitement. Up above, beneath a canopy of dark silk, sat the supreme ruler, Lord Zar, whose daughter would soon attempt to kill him. The champion's gate loomed across the arena, a monolithic portal carved from obsidian and veined with strange glowing minerals. When it opened, the crowd's roar pitched into something close to reverence. She stepped out like a nightmare woven into flesh. Her name was Vaila. The undefeated champion of Zarkal. Warrior priestess. Daughter of Zar. Her skin was twilight purple, patterned with darker filigree that pulsed faintly as if alive. Her armor was a blend of leather and living metal that coiled around her like it had grown there. In her hand, an energy blade hummed with a curve like a crescent moon, radiating green light with every subtle shift of her grip. She moved like liquid death, each step an execution of poise and power. Her golden eyes locked on Cain across the battlefield. There was no recognition, no curiosity, only disdain. Arena Marshal Gruth raised his voice. "By ancient right, the human Cain faces final judgment. Do you have any last words before the sands drink your blood?" The crowd leaned in, expecting a plea. But Cain didn't look at Gruth. He looked only at her. "I am a soldier of Terra. I do not beg. But your people claim to follow honor, older than this blood sport. I invoke the right of Tazel. The duel of spirit." A stunned hush fell like a curtain across the arena. Even the ambient hum of technology seemed to still. Vaila's eyes flickered. Just slightly. And for the first time, Cain saw something in her eyes that was not contempt. It was calculation. From the high box, Lord Zar surged to his feet, fists clenched at the insult. "This is a farce," he roared, though it was Vaila's response that mattered. She tilted her head. Then, she stepped forward, weapon lowered, voice like polished obsidian. "You challenge me to a duel of spirit? Do you even know what that means?" "I do," Cain said, loud and clear. "It means this isn't just a fight of strength. It's a test of will. Of endurance. Unless, of course, you're afraid." The insult was a blade. He watched it strike her, not in her skin, but in the invisible space of reputation. Her face twitched. "I accept," she said, voice a low growl. "But understand this, human, your spirit will break before your bones do." Marshal Gruth nodded solemnly. The challenge is accepted. The duel of spirit begins. There were no boundaries. No time limit. The rules were cruel in their simplicity, the match would continue until one's will shattered beneath the other. Vaila ignited her blade again, and this time, she moved. Not with rage. With precision. Her steps were a masterclass in predatory grace. She didn't charge. She dissected. Cain had no delusions. His own weapon was a scavenged Vero blade, worn and chipped, barely more than a desperate tool. He didn't meet power with power. He sidestepped. He deflected. He moved like water around stone. Every block aimed at her arm, not her blade. Every dodge stole her momentum. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. They expected carnage. Instead, they got choreography. As they circled each other beneath the rising heat of Zarkal's twin suns, the air between them became charged, not just with combat, but with something else. Recognition. He saw it in the way her movements changed. Less sure. More reactive. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to be seen. Hours passed like smoke. Sweat drenched his body. Her blade had seared his shoulder, but she bore her own wound now, a thin red trail along her temple. A souvenir from the stone Cain had kicked into her path. Then came the moment. She lifted her blade high, preparing the same devastating overhead slash she'd used twice before. Cain didn't meet it. He ducked. Twisted. Grabbed her wrist mid-swing, slipping just inside her guard. The hilt of his Vero blade cracked hard into the crook of her elbow. Her weapon flew. The green light fizzled out mid-air. Cain stood over her, weapon raised, the tip just inches from the elegant line of her throat. She didn't move. She waited. And then he lowered it. The crowd erupted, not in awe, but in outrage. This was sacrilege. To deny the kill was to reject victory. But he'd made his choice. Mercy, in this place, was the most violent act he could commit. She lay there, breathing hard, eyes wide. For the first time, she looked at him not as an enemy, but as something much worse. A mirror. The silence that followed Cain's act of mercy hung over the Colosseum like a shroud. No one cheered. No one moved. It was as if the entire planet had forgotten how to breathe. He had broken her. Not with a weapon, but with something infinitely more dangerous. Restraint. Vaila remained on the ground, stunned and still, the phantom weight of his blade lingering at her throat. Around them, the chants of her name had died into a deafening void. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The world she had ruled with fire and steel had just cracked open beneath her. Then the noise returned, not as cheers, but a low, primal growl. Thousands of Vorax voices, snarling with confusion and rage. The refusal of a killing blow was an abomination. A violation of the very foundation of honor. Up in the ceremonial box, Lord Zar's face twisted in fury. His daughter, the undefeated warrior, had been spared. And worse, she had accepted it. He rose from his seat, his entire frame vibrating with restrained violence. But before he could speak, Vaila did. "The duel is not concluded," she said, voice rough but firm. "It is, suspended." Gasps echoed from the arena's stone walls. She pushed herself upright, her face unreadable, her injured arm held stiffly against her side. She did not look to her father. She looked only at Cain. "Take him to the deep cells," she commanded. Gruth hesitated for just a moment, just long enough for everyone to realize he had never seen this happen before, then signaled the guards. Cain didn't resist. The victory wasn't physical. The duel had been spiritual. And in her eyes, he had won. But the cost was not yet clear. He was dragged through underground tunnels slick with condensation and history. Down, deeper than the gladiator cells. Down into silence. Into the heart of the planet's oldest prison. The deep cells were not meant for warriors. They were meant for those the Vorix wanted forgotten. Kane was left in a dark chamber, his only light a dying sconce that barely illuminated the moss-covered walls. His wounds were hastily wrapped, his meager food delivered through a narrow slit in the door. There were no trials, no interrogations. Only stillness. Only the ache of time. He had expected death. But this was worse. At first, he clung to memory, of Earth, of stars, of sunlight. Then, he began to replay the duel. Her eyes. The moment she dropped her guard, not in defense, but in disbelief. The tremor in her voice when she halted the ritual with just 4 words. Then came the footsteps. Shuffle of guards. Something lighter. Purposeful. She stood in the hallway outside his cell, a shadow outlined by torchlight. She was no longer clad in armor. She wore a dark tunic made of some soft leather, and her hair, once twisted and braided into the symbols of war, now hung free, a long curtain of ink-black silk. Her golden eyes glowed in the gloom. Why? She asked. Not cold. Not accusatory. Just, broken. Kane didn't move. Because you were unarmed, he said simply. That is not an answer, she snapped, stepping forward, gripping the bars so tightly her knuckles turned nearly white against her purple skin. That is weakness. No, he replied. It's choice. Honor isn't how you die. It's how you live. And I don't live by killing someone who's already lost. She stared at him for a long time. Her mouth opened, then closed again. There were no words in her world for what she was feeling. But she came again. And again. Each time cloaked in secrecy. No one saw her slip into the deep tunnels. No one dared ask. The guards quickly learned to look away. To listen to the quiet. At first, her visits were interrogations. Demands for explanation, attempts to reframe his choice as a stratagem, a ploy for survival. He deflected with patience, with questions of his own. You talk of honor like it's universal, he said once, his voice ragged from disuse. But what if your version of it is just another prison? That is what strength is for, she argued. To build walls around the weak. Or maybe, to open doors they've never been allowed to walk through. Her mind wrestled with it. She was a creature of certainty. Kane was not. He spoke of compassion, of weakness as a kind of strength. It rattled her. It made her think in ways that twisted something long buried. Her visits shifted. No longer just questions. Now, they lingered. One night, she brought food, real food, not the chalky protein paste of the dungeon. Another night, a small balm for his wounds. Once, she said nothing, just sat silently beyond the bars, her face a storm of thought. The guards turned their heads. The stones whispered. Something was happening in the dark. She confessed things in pieces. The loneliness of being the champion. The weight of being her father's daughter. The absence of choice. Of softness. Of being seen as anything but perfect. Kane listened. Really listened. Not like an enemy. Not like a subordinate. But like someone who understood pain, deep, soul-level pain. Eventually, they laughed. Not often. Not easily. But it happened. She asked about Earth. About yellow suns and blue oceans. He told her about music. About how humans wrote songs about sorrow, about joy, about rebellion. The idea of singing about grief fascinated her. It was too inefficient to make sense. So she asked for more. He talked about being a soldier. The thrill of battle, yes, but also the price. The friends lost. The moments that hollowed him out. He told her that mercy was not something he gave. It was something that gave him back a piece of himself. She didn't cry. But she blinked more than once. And one night, something changed. He used her name, not her title. Vaila, he said, gently, when she pressed him again on why he spared her. She froze. She had never heard her name like that before. Not as a command. Not as a prophecy. But as a question. She stood closer to the bars that night. Close enough that he could see the flicker of fear in her eyes, not of him. Of herself. What happens next? She asked, her voice quieter than ever. Cain didn't answer. He stepped forward, slowly, lifting his hand, not to touch, just to reach. She didn't pull away. And for the first time, the bars between them felt like paper. Their meetings blurred the line between prisoner and captor until neither could say where one role ended and the other began. What started as confrontation became curiosity, then understanding, then something more dangerous still, intimacy. Vaila began to bring him things she shouldn't have. A real blanket. A flask of crystal clear water. A small salve made from herbaceous extracts that smelled faintly of midnight rain and soothed his wounds better than anything in the barracks of the Terran Alliance. She told herself it was to keep him alive, so he could finish the duel she had not yet resolved. But in her heart, she knew better. She wanted him to live because in his presence, something in her did too. Cain noticed the change. Her visits, once interrogations filled with pointed questions, were now hours-long silences interrupted only by stories. He would speak of Earth, lush green hills, forests full of chirping birds, rain that fell gently on rooftops. It all sounded like myth to her, the kind of soft fantasy her world taught children to outgrow. One night, he told her about music. Not the percussive war chants of the arena, but songs written for no purpose other than expression. It's not always logical, he said. Sometimes it's just to say, I'm here. I feel this. She leaned her forehead lightly against the bars, her eyes closed. I cannot imagine feeling something without purpose, she whispered. You already are, he replied. She didn't come the next night. Or the next. When she returned, her jaw was set tight, her movements stiff with conflict. Cain didn't speak. He just waited, sitting on the edge of the cold stone slab that had become his world. She stepped close to the bars, close enough for her shadow to spill across his chest. You make me question things I am not allowed to question, she said quietly. That's not my fault. It is, she hissed. You exist wrong. He chuckled, a short, sharp sound. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in this place. She grabbed the bars, eyes wild. I am the champion. Daughter of Tsar. I have killed 100 in the name of our gods, our honor, our people. And yet, her voice caught, and when she spoke again, it was with something raw, something wounded. Your mercy undid all of that. Cain stood, crossing the cell until they were only inches apart. No, Vaila. You're undoing it. All I did was lower my blade. And then, without a word, she unlocked the cell. It was the softest sound, a click, but to them, it rang louder than a war horn. The door swung open. He didn't rush out. He didn't raise his voice. He stood still, watching her. And she stood frozen, her hand still on the door. As if waiting for him to make the next move. Instead, he said, you don't have to be what they made you. She stepped inside. Her scent reached him first, a clean, floral sharpness, like a flower fighting to bloom in scorched earth. Her hand trembled as it rose to touch his jaw. His fingers caught hers, calloused human skin against hers, smooth, cool, marked by living patterns that pulsed faintly with her racing pulse. That night, the cell became something else. A shelter. A confession. Their lips met not in hunger, but in a kind of frightened reverence. The kind of kiss one gives when the world outside is on fire, and this may be the only moment to feel. He tasted rebellion in her breath, and she tasted humanity in his. They fell asleep tangled together beneath the rough blanket she'd brought him cycles ago, bodies curled like a question neither dared to ask out loud. They became more careful after that. She visited during deep night, long after the guards had fallen into their habitual lethargy. The cell guard, a lower caste Vorax who knew better than to ask questions, learned to time his rounds carefully. He saw too much. But he said nothing. Because fear, in Zarkal, was more valuable than loyalty. He noticed the way she entered as shadow and exited as turmoil. He noticed the empty trays left behind, sometimes holding delicacies from the royal kitchens, sometimes containing 2 empty flasks of fermented crystal fruit. He noticed, but he did not speak. Because to speak was to die. But secrets, as they always do, began to bleed into the stone. Lord Zar noticed the change in his daughter. The duels she once judged with ice-cold precision, she now watched in silence. The younger warriors she used to train, she now ignored. She wandered alone more often. And her eyes, once twin suns of burning clarity, now flickered with storm clouds of doubt. Zar felt the thread loosening. And he followed it. He sent his private guards, not the arena brutes, but his true agents. Cloaked in black, loyal to him alone. They followed the whisper of her footsteps. They watched her descend into the deep cells. They saw her slip inside the human's cage. And they reported. He came himself. Lord Zar did not summon her to court. He came in the flesh, his massive figure casting a long shadow down the staircase of the catacombs. 4 guards flanked him, their crimson armor etched with the symbols of death. They found her not standing guard, but sitting on the stone slab, carefully stitching a tear in Kane's tunic with thread from her own cloak. It was not the touch of a captor and her charge. It was a quiet, devastating act of care. Zar's voice sliced through the gloom. You have dishonored your name, your house, and me. Vaila rose slowly. Her face was impassive, but her hands shook as she set the needle aside. I have done nothing to dishonor myself, she said quietly. You laid with this creature, he snarled, unable to look directly at Kane, who now stood beside her, silent but unbowed. You showed it mercy. Now you show it affection. You are no longer fit to bear my name. He pointed at Kane, gauntlet finger trembling with fury. The duel was paused. Now it will end. At dawn, you will return to the sand. You will kill him, or you will die beside him. Kane's jaw tightened. Vaila didn't move. I no longer recognize you, Zar said coldly. But I will make sure the world remembers your death. He turned, his cloak hissing over the stone, leaving only silence in his wake. And the understanding that this story, whatever it had become, was now barreling toward its final, inevitable chapter. The arena at dawn was not the same place it had been before. Gone were the drunken chants and thunderous howls of the blood-hungry Vorax. In their place was a silence that gripped the Colosseum like a shroud. The spectators didn't come for sport today. They came for judgment. For punishment. For a cleansing. The air was cold, crisp in a way that felt ceremonial. Ritualistic. The twin sons of Zarkal had only just crested the black stone ridges beyond the arena wall, casting long, daggered shadows across the sand. Kane stood at one gate, his body marked with the signs of survival, 1,000 bruises that hadn't quite healed, a limp in his left leg, the stubborn glint of rebellion still burning behind his storm-gray eyes. At the opposite gate, Vaila emerged, clad in full ceremonial armor for the first time since their duel. Her energy blade shimmered green in the morning haze, not with triumph, but with grief. Her face was unreadable, the perfect mask of the champion of Zarkal. But Kane had touched the skin beneath it. He knew what trembled there. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Each of them carried the weight of what they'd built in secret and what they now stood to lose in front of everyone. Arena Marshal Groth stood in the center, the ceremonial staff in his hands shaking ever so slightly as he looked between the two figures. For once, there was no bravado in his voice, just a grim, tired inevitability. By decree of High Lord Tsar, he said, the duel of spirit resumes. One must fall. This is the will of the bloodline. He stepped back. The gates slammed shut behind them. And then there were just two. They began to move, not with rage, not even with caution, but with the heavy cadence of sorrow. They circled each other like dancers at a funeral, each step etched with memories, each breath weighed with what couldn't be spoken aloud. Kane's Viroblade felt heavier than it ever had. Vaila's energy weapon buzzed in her hand like a ghost of the past. Their feet disturbed the sand in patterns they'd danced before. But everything was different now. This wasn't a fight. It was an ending. Their blades met with a soft hiss, not a clash. The contact was more ritual than aggression. Again and again, they traded blows, never striking to kill. Their rhythm was haunting, almost beautiful. Like the memory of a battle, not the real thing. The crowd didn't cheer. They barely breathed. Even High Lord Tsar watched in silence, his golden eyes narrowing not with victory, but with unease. This was not what he had demanded. This was not the cleansing he craved. This was a rebellion in slow motion. Back on the sand, Kane moved in, stepping inside Vaila's guard. His blade traced the edge of her armor, then pulled away. She returned with a spinning arc that he ducked effortlessly. Again and again. Feint. Withdraw. Touch. Step back. They weren't trying to kill each other. They were saying goodbye. And then they stopped. Standing close, too close. Foreheads nearly touching. Their breaths tangled between them. The entire arena seemed to lean in. I can't, she whispered, her voice trembling with something far too human for the warrior priestess of Zarkal. I know, Kane whispered back, reaching up to gently wipe the single tear that traced a golden path down her cheek. His hand lingered there, memorizing the shape of her jaw, the heat of her skin. Then, together, they broke away, not from each other, but from the script written for them. They turned their weapons inward. Gasps rippled through the stands, then shrieks of disbelief. Kane drove the chipped tip of his Viroblade toward his own heart just as Vaila guided the glowing edge of her energy weapon across her abdomen. The pain was sudden, but it was not fear that marked their faces. It was peace. They collapsed to the sand, falling toward each other with the instinct of lovers reaching for one final moment. Their hands met, fingers intertwining with quiet desperation. Their bodies, battered and broken, lay pressed together in the center of the arena, the same sand where once he had stood over her with mercy in his eyes. There was no roar. There was only silence. It lasted for what felt like an eternity. The crowd, thousands strong, looked on, paralyzed. A civilization built on conquest and dominance was witnessing something it did not understand, surrender by choice. A love so potent it defied the gods they bled for. High Lord Tsar rose slowly from his seat, his expression unreadable. His daughter, his perfect weapon, had died not in victory or shame, but in defiance. With the human he had condemned, whose presence had already shattered too much. He said nothing. There were no words. Gruth approached the bodies, his heavy boots dragging through the sand. He knelt beside them, looked down at their still joined hands, then looked up into the stands. Let it be known, he said, voice cracking, that the champion of Zarkal and the human Kane are dead. But what followed was not the usual decree of honor restored. Because something else had been born in the quiet. A whisper. A question. A splinter in the bedrock of belief. What if honor was not in victory? What if strength was not in domination? What if mercy was power? In the years that followed, the Duel of Spirit would be retold in hushed voices across Zarkul. A story not of battle, but of resistance. Not of conquest, but of love. Young warriors would pause before killing blows. Elders would debate the meaning of the silence that day. Tsar's grip would tighten, but never fully recover. The empire did not fall. But it cracked. And the first fracture came from the moment a human lowered his weapon, and taught a champion how to feel. Section 5. The story did not end with their deaths. Not truly. Not in the ways that matter. The blood that soaked the sands of Zarkul's arena became more than a stain. It became a symbol. And symbols, once born, are almost impossible to kill. In the days after the duel, the arena remained closed. An unspoken mourning held the Colosseum in a strange grip, as if the ground itself refused to drink more blood. The bodies of Cain and Vaila were removed in silence, interred not in the crypts of heroes, nor the pits of traitors, but somewhere in between. A forgotten alcove beneath the citadel, sealed without marker or ceremony. The High Lord gave no speeches. He issued no proclamations. To speak of them was to give their act power. And Tsar, above all, feared the power of an idea he could not control. But the silence didn't stop the story from spreading. The guards had seen the duel. The arena staff had watched in stunned disbelief. Even the most hardened spectators had carried home the vision of the warrior priestess and the Terran soldier dying not for spectacle, but for something far more dangerous. Choice. Rumors became whispers. Whispers became conversations. Conversations became doctrine, quiet, heretical, subversive doctrine. Among the lowest castes of Vorik society, those who had only ever known obedience, a single question began to take root. What if we don't have to live like this? They called it the Shard. Not a rebellion, not yet. Just a name. A fracture in the armor of tradition. A splinter of thought that dug deeper with every passing season. No banners. No leaders. Just a memory passed from one quiet voice to another. He could have killed her. She could have killed him. But they didn't. Cain and Vaila became myth. But not the kind celebrated by the Empire. They were the kind of myth that frightened kings. The deep cells, once a place of forgotten screams, became a sanctuary for those who dared to think differently. Warriors who faltered at the edge of killing blows. Scholars who questioned ancient laws. Outcasts who began to see their scars as something more than shame. A mosaic was smuggled into one of the forbidden tunnels beneath the arena. No name. No words. Just two figures lying in the sand, hands clasped. It was destroyed the next cycle, but 3 more appeared the week after. High Lord Tsar aged quickly in the cycles that followed. The weight of absolute rule turned heavier once cracks began to appear. His champions grew fiercer, more ruthless, but they lacked something Vaila had possessed in terrifying abundance, belief. And Cain had given her something even Tsar never could. Doubt. Far away, across the stars, the Terran Alliance received fragmented intelligence of the duel. At first, it was buried, just another footnote in the chronicles of war. But in certain military academies, Cain's name began to resurface. First as a caution. Then as a case study. Eventually, as a hero. Not for how he fought. But for why he stopped. In a training hall on Terra Prime, beneath a massive archway etched with the words, "Endure, Adapt, Overcome," a small plaque was placed beside a quiet garden alcove. Cain, Terran operative. Died in the arena of Zarkul, but not as a prisoner. Died as a teacher, a warrior, and something more. No rank. No medals. Just the lesson. Years passed. Then decades. But still, in certain dark corners of Zarkul's cities, there are those who leave flowers, alien blooms in shades of purple and silver, at the forgotten places. Quiet tributes. half prayers, half rebellion. The story of Cain and Vaila is not shouted. It is whispered. Because whispers carry further in silence. And that was the story of Cain and Vaila, a tale of defiance, compassion, and a love that cracked the foundations of an empire. They didn't lead armies. They didn't spark revolutions in fire and steel. But in a place where mercy was forbidden, they chose each other over power. Over fear. Over death. Their final act wasn't a sacrifice. It was a declaration. A message across time and culture. That love, real, painful, impossible love, is the strongest rebellion of all. If this story moved you, if it sparked something in you, don't let it end here. Share it. Keep the whisper alive. Because the world changes not through noise, but through quiet acts of courage that ripple outward. Like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, or tell me what you'd risk everything for. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories that shape us, sci-fi, fantasy, and the myths we're still writing today. And hey, if you want more of this kind of storytelling, complex characters, layered conflict, and emotionally charged worlds, you know what to do. Tap that bell. Until next time, stay curious, stay human, and remember. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do, is put down the blade.